One of the concerns I have about national security and our national interests is the challenge of a nuclear-armed Iran. I came to the floor last week to say that when it comes to dealing with Iran, as we count down to the deadline for an agreement, the truth is always elusive. I said then that international inspectors reported that Tehran's stockpile of nuclear fuel, rather than decreasing, actually increased by 20%. Now, in the last days before the agreement deadline is reached, David Albright, a well-respected expert on Iran's nuclear program, in an article for the Institute for Science and International Security, says that the State Department's explanation of Iran's newly produced 3.5% enriched uranium falls short, and that the State Department seems to be making excuses for the fact that Iran has not reduced its enrichment level, which they agreed to in the Joint Plan of Action. Now, the fact is, uranium enrichment, when taken to the maximum, can lead to bomb material. So reducing the enrichment level is critical in terms of possible breakout time and Iran's ability to develop a nuclear weapon. Albright says, and I quote, "The core of the State Department's explanation in the last few days appears to be that Iran meets the conditions of the Joint Plan of Action once it feeds newly produced low-enriched uranium hexafluoride gas into the uranium conversion plant at Esfahan." Now, to bring this down into lay terms, this conversion plant is there to take this enriched uranium that, if further enriched, can lead to bomb material, and to transform the enriched uranium that can be prepared for potential nuclear material to an oxide form. And that's a form for which the nuclear bomb threat is dramatically reduced. But, Madam President, the Esfahan plant didn't even become operational until the fall of 2014, a year after it was supposed to have opened. And conveniently for the Iranians, it's having operational difficulties, making it highly unlikely that Iran can convert the low-enriched uranium hexafluoride, which we are concerned about, into enriched uranium dioxide used for making nuclear power reactor fuel. Put simply, at the end of the day, once again, Iran will not have lived up to what they agreed to. Now, we knew from the beginning it was going to be a challenge. We knew that it was going to be difficult for the Iranians to blend down their nuclear fuel rather than to ship it out to another country, which so far they have refused to do. And we knew that it would be a concern if they weren't able to convert low-enriched uranium hexafluoride into the enriched uranium dioxide, the one in which we have obviously far less concerns. And frankly, because that is obviously a problem, I am concerned, because as the Albright article states, quote, "The amounts of low-enriched uranium amount to about 4,000 kilograms of 3.5 low-enriched uranium hexafluoride, enough to potentially make 2 to 3 nuclear weapons if further enriched to weapons-grade uranium." 2 to 3 nuclear weapons if further enriched to nuclear-grade uranium. Now, I'm concerned that this is more blue smoke and mirrors that overlook the real ambitions of an untrustworthy negotiating partner. I'm concerned that Iran is still saying it will not ship out excess low-enriched uranium, but somehow blend it down and store it at the plant, which can't possibly blend down enough at this point to meet the requirements under the Joint Plan of Action. And I'm concerned that this is more of an issue than the administration is willing to concede, particularly if at the end there is no deal and we, through sanctions relief, paid them to convert, and then they walk away with massive amounts of low enriched uranium that can be fed into their centrifuges and be easily converted to highly enriched uranium and on to weapons-grade uranium. According to David Albright, and I quote, based on the IAEA's report, that's the International Atomic Energy Administration's report to member states, the problems in making enriched uranium oxide were apparent by the fall of 2014. But the administration decided not to make a major issue about the lack of oxide production. The article goes on to say, and I quote, concluding that Iran has met the joint plan of action condition to convert to oxide newly enriched up to 5% is incorrect. And it further says, in this case, the potential violation refers to Iran not producing the enriched oxide at the end of the initial 6-month period of the joint plan of action, and again, even after its first extension. The choosing, and this is a continuing quote, the choosing of a weaker condition which must be met cannot be a good precedent for interpreting more important provisions in a final deal. Moreover, it tends to confirm the view of critics that future violations of a long-term deal will be downplayed for the sake of generating or maintaining support for the deal, close quotes. It says that, quote, the administration relied on a technical remedy that Iran had not demonstrated it could carry out. And the article concludes, quote, the State Department has some explaining to do. Now, Madam President, the enrichment issue is one thing, but then there is the recently released UN Security Council report on a whole host of the existing Security Council resolutions and mandates as it relates to Iran. And there are other problems as well. They're well documented in this just recently released report. That Iran has continued to deny the legitimacy of Security Council resolutions not addressed in the Joint Plan of Action. That Iran's arms transfers have actively continued, raising concerns in particular in the region. That cases of non-compliance with the travel ban have been observed. That Iran has continued certain nuclear activities, including enrichment and work at Iraq. That there is no progress by Iran in addressing possible military dimensions that had been agreed to be addressed by Iran and the International Atomic Energy Agency. The most troubling relates to allegations of large-scale, high-explosive experimentation at Parchin. And it goes on to talk about Iran's missile technology. So put this the right way. And here, we have a sense from the UN Security Council's report, which the UN reports speak to Iran's missile capability. I've taken a map that I give credit to the New York Times for about what that means. Iran has 2 kinds of ballistic missiles capable of delivering a nuclear weapon, according to the report. The Shahab missile, a variation of the liquid fuel Shahab-3, with a range of about 1,600 kilometers, which is about 995 miles. And the other is the Shahil missile with a range of about 2,000 kilometers, which is about 1,250 miles. So here's the first missile, encompasses most of the Gulf, and certainly our ally, the State of Israel, as well as Afghanistan, Pakistan, to mention, among others, Turkey. And then the longer range missile actually goes as far as into Europe. And this is a missile technology that is still in development. So this is, to quote from the UN Security Council report, so we can see the range of Iran's missiles and the potential military dimensions of its pursuits. And then there's the issue, Mr. President, of arms embargo violations and the transfer of conventional arms. For whatever reasons, and the report speculates that maybe member states, meaning member countries of the United Nations, don't want to upset the apple cart of the negotiations, so there hasn't been reporting, even in the midst of very clear violations taking place that have been largely reported. But it says, for whatever reasons, there have been no reports from member states to the UN about the transfer of conventional arms by Iran. But the UN report nevertheless says, quote, the panel notes media reports pointing to continued military support and alleged arms transfers to Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, Yemen, to Hezbollah and Hamas. The report also says that, quote, a shipment of arms was confirmed by Masoud Barzani, the president of Kurdistan's regional government, who said, quote, we asked for weapons and Iran was the first country to provide them. A clear violation if there ever was one. And according to the report, some member states informed the panel that Iran's nuclear procurement trends and circumvention techniques remain basically unchanged. In fact, Great Britain informed the UN panel that they are aware of an active Iranian nuclear procurement network associated with Iran's centrifuge technology company known as TESA and Calais Electric Company, which are listed sanctioned entities under the UN Security Council resolutions. And the report further says that member states have reported on the methods that Iran has used and continues to use to carry out financial transactions below the radar to conceal any connection to Iran. Some states, for example, that import oil have authorized their banks to receive payments into accounts belonging to the Central Bank of Iran. But the funds were reportedly paid out against invoices for exports of goods to Iran, although the goods were never exported, meaning money was taken out and ultimately made its way to Iran, even though they were not for payment of anything because nothing was shipped. The simple fact is, and there are many other examples in the UN Security Council report, which I commend my colleagues' attention to, we can't trust Iran to abide by its agreements or to abide by United Nations resolution, even when they are in the midst of negotiations, when you think they'd be behaving the best. You want to put your best foot forward. Why do we think we can trust them if they are violating UN Security Council resolutions, which is the world, not the US, not even the P5+1, but the world telling them you can't do these things because they violate the international order? Why do we think we can entrust them to enrich uranium, not to pursue a weapons program, and not find any way possible to renege on any agreement they reach when they are violating existing Security Council resolutions? As I've said, Mr. President, I'll come to the floor to reiterate my skepticism that Iran will not do all it can to pursue their agreements, but rather to find a way to pursue its agenda, to play fast and loose with the truth, hide it, cover it up, and buy time. Iran, Mr. President, needs to be held responsible for its commitments. Forget about its word. Its commitments. There can be no slippage, no delays, no obfuscation. That's how they succeeded in the past to bring themselves to being on the verge of becoming a threshold nuclear state. So where do we go from here? It remains to be seen whether compliance with that which has already been agreed to by the Iranians, even at this early stage while the world is watching, can be realized, or will it be explained away? I intend to come to this floor again and again to hold Iran accountable for its actions, to keep a laser-like focus on the mullahs in Tehran, because I fear that when that spotlight is off, when the press is gone, when the agreement is out of the headlines and the curtain closes on the P5+1 talks, Iran will pull back into the shadows. And I ask my colleagues, when that happens, and if it goes wrong, what will we do then? You know, I haven't seen the final agreement, so we'll have to wait to make a final judgment on it. But if the final agreement follows in line of the framework agreement, then we have a set of circumstances where we are not solving a problem. I think even some of the experts that were before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee yesterday in a briefing admit to the fact, and one or two of them are proponents of an agreement, but they said this does not solve the problem. it only kicks the problem down the road. Now, I'd rather, those are hard choices no matter what, but I'd rather confront a country that is on the path to nuclear weapons before they get it, and when they are at its weakest point, not when it becomes a country at its stronger point with far more resources, with sanctions that have largely dissipated, and even with snapback provisions, which I think we should have. But several years down the road, when the world is now engaged Iran in doing business, and Iran has risen in its economy, it's an economy that has already stopped its free fall, just on the basis of expectations, and decides possibly to break out 3 or 4 years down the road, putting all of those international sanctions back together, as someone who was the author of those sanctions here in the Congress, I can tell you, that's going to take a lot more. There's no instantaneous snapback of, oh, we'll put the sanctions back and then they will have effect immediately. You have to tell the world, you have to give them notice that in fact their sanctions back in effect. You have to tell companies that now went and did business, you got to give them time to disinvest from those businesses. And by the time you add that, if experience is a good barometer, we gave at a minimum 6 months lead time to tell the world this is going to be a sanctionable activity. And then by the time we actually pursued enforcement and implementation of those, far beyond, close to a year. Well, that happens to be the time that we're supposedly buying for breakout time. So I am going to continue to come to the floor to continue to shed a spotlight on the challenges that we have with Iran, on the shortcomings of the interim agreement as we hope for a good final agreement, but I will use the refrain that the administration at one time used, which is that no agreement is better than a bad agreement. And that is what my concern is, Mr. President, that we are headed towards a bad agreement. With that, I yield the floor.